Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the queens, if not the queen of CrossFit, Toomey's Snatch. This woman has achieved some unreal accolades. I'm talking CrossFit Games winner 6 times, Commonwealth Games gold 2018 at the 58 kilo weight category. One other thing that me and Tia share in common, 14th place at the Olympic Games in 2016. There's a fact for you. Me and her both competed in the same Olympic Games and finished in the same position. But this woman, she's not even like a weightlifter. That's not her like main thing. She's a weightlifter, but she's not a weightlifter. But yet she still finished 14th, which is why I think it's so important today that we take a look at her technique and get a real insight into why is Tia so good at weightlifting, and is this the reason why she had dominated the world of CrossFit for so many years. The lifting video that we're going to be taking a look at today in particular is of one of Tia's snatches where she was leading the competition and she's got 87 kilos on the bar. There's a couple of things that I want to look at with Tia's technique because it is not the most clinical technique in my opinion, but it is extremely powerful. So let's dive into it and take a little look at Tia's lift. The first thing that I want you to notice is the time that she takes in her setup position. Regardless of your standard of your ability, this is probably one of the fastest ways that you can hack your Olympic lifting is to build yourself a clean pre-lift process. The importance of the pre-lift process more than anything to tell your mind and your body to prepare for a maximum execution of a good lift. And being rigid with a pre-lift process will help you become more consistent with your Olympic lifts. Things that I like to do before I go for one of my big lifts is I like to count myself in. When I'm stood over that bar and I'm doubting myself, at this moment here is when I go, what if I miss this? If I drop it, I'm gonna hurt myself. If I don't get this, I'm not gonna win the competition. All of these things run through my head at this very moment. What I do at this time is I like to count myself in. I count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And purely because I'm counting at this point, it distracts me from thinking about anything negative happening during the lift. And then when I get to 1, I just go. And I think that's what's happening right now in Tia's head. Maybe not counting, but she's preparing herself for a maximum execution. So taking that time over the bar is super important. And that's one of the most valuable lessons that I want you to learn from Tia's lifting that we see right now. So you see, she takes her grip, she takes a nice deep breath, she holds for a moment to feel comfortable and balanced before she begins the lift. And then she sets nice and tight and she goes. Now, she absolutely rips the bloody head straight off this barbell when she initiates, but I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. So let's zoom in and take a look. One thing I noticed about Tia is she actually looks down in her setup position, which generally causes a little bit of rounding in the mid to upper back or makes it difficult for you to set the back super tight in the start. But nonetheless, what you'll actually see is although she's actually closing her eyes when she rips this bar off the floor, she maintains a really consistent angle of her back. And this is what I'd refer to as a dynamic start. When you're trying to gain momentum in that first initial phase as it's coming off the floor, we watch closely here. She's actually pulling the slack out the bar as she's initiating this movement. But nonetheless, she's still maintaining a very consistent angle of back. This is something that I see a lot of beginners try to replicate. It's very difficult to be consistent with a dynamic start unless you have a very, very high level of skill. And for the vast majority of people that are probably watching this video, you included, whilst it might be great, it takes a hell of a lot of practice and many, many years of practice to refine this technique to be able to execute a dynamic start correctly, which is why it's not something that I would commonly suggest for people to copy unless you're at a high level of experience in Olympic weightlifting. You're going to be a lot more consistent with the static start. But nonetheless, she maintains a good angle of the back, which is great. You'll see that as she's beginning the lift, she kind of picks her head up then and is starting to look more in a position that I'd want her to look in to maintain that tension in the mid to upper back as she reaches the knee height. Now, a couple of things happen here at knee height that I want to talk about with you. One thing that you'll notice with Tia, as a result of that dynamic rip off the floor, her arms have started to bend at this point. Generally, when people do this and the arms start to bend, you will also see in conjunction with this that the legs will get quite straight in this first phase of the pull. This puts, as you can see with her feet here, this puts the weight into the heels in the lift. If the weight starts to sink into the heels at this point during the lift, at some point it has to move back into the toe for you to be able to hit full extension. If you think about it, you're standing on your heels and then you try and stand up onto your toes, the transfer of a weight goes from heel to toe, which generally causes forward momentum, which we want to try and avoid when we're Olympic lifting. So that would be actually something that I'd say I'd like to see Tia change a little bit, so she puts a little bit more of the load in the legs. People will do this that favor strength in their posterior chain, which is why we'll see at this point that her torso is a lot more parallel to the floor than you'd see with some lifters. This can sometimes be a proportional thing. As we start to see from this point, Tia's now got to get the weight into the toes before she hits extension. As a result of this causes the shoulders to sit back behind the bar during extension. And then again, she's come onto the toes very early as a byproduct of this before she hits full extension. Bum comes up early, or you get to parallel to the floor. As a result of that, what's going to happen during the second phase of the lift is shoulders are going to go back, hips are going to come forward. This can cause the legs to not hit full extension. You'll see that regardless of that, she actually drives through the bar extremely well and finds a lovely extension position. Regardless of that slightly different technique, shoulders going back behind the bar, she stays nice and tall and hits extension here at the top of the lift. Great. What we may see is some differences happen now in her receive position. Likelihood is chest will tend to drop as a byproduct of this, which could affect her receiving position. What I do really love about this lift in particular is watch her feet move. This is a lovely bit of foot movement here. They create space for her hips to sit between the ankles, and then she's nice and deep into her bottom position. One thing that I'll notice, and you'll see a little bit of collapsing of the knees happening into this receiving position. There's a couple of things that I see that cause this. One of the main things is tightness in the adductors. If you're tight in the adductors, which is from like kind of groin down to knee, muscles through here. If you're tight here, this will cause a collapse of the knees in the receiving position. Alternatively, it could be that her glutes are a little bit weak. Other thing is chest dropping very slightly, which is quite easy for us to see here. Torso angle now is quite heavily forward. If the hips move back, the knees collapse in to counterbalance. Whereas if she was to stay a little bit more upright with torso at this point, it makes it easier for you to keep the chest up and utilize the legs, which would mean that then the knees would track a little bit further over the toes into the bottom position, and then she'd stand up without letting the hips rise. The reason why I don't want the hips to rise as we're standing up too much is because now if we look again at this back angle in relation to the floor, major joints or large masses of body are now not underneath the bar. When I say about underneath the bar, I'm talking directly down underneath the bar. There's not a lot, but there is a hell of a lot of pressure going through the shoulders. This can lead to internal rotation and potentially some impingement or excessive pressure on shoulder and elbows than what we'd want. And this is what I talk about time and time again. It's about building a technique that's going to allow you to lift for a very long time. It will help you stay injury-free for longer. Whereas sometimes when pressure's put like this in the shoulders and in the joints, we can get into issues. Whereas I would want to be taking a lot of the load in the legs and the lower body. Nonetheless, she stands up, takes a little bit of a step forward. We knew that there was going to be a little bit of momentum forward in the lift based on what we saw with the heel to toe happening in the pool, and she makes a good lift. But this is the most clutch thing ever, right? So she's just snatched 87 kilos. She just mic drops, turns the head, and just bowls off. Gangster. This is potentially because she had another attempt to go. And I see this happen a lot with people. When you're working up to a PB or you hit a weight that you're really happy with or that you haven't hit before, you celebrate and get really excited. That emotional dump of the excitement of you hitting the lift can then result in you switching off. And if you've got another attempt or another lift to go, subconsciously start to think, oh, I was actually really happy with the one before. So if I get this, it's going to kind of be a bonus. Whereas having her like stone cold Steve Austin attitude post lift keeps her focused and in set to go and have another attempt and give a maximal effort. And I think this is a very professional approach to her lifting, in the way that if you're in an event where there's multiple attempts, to stay focused in between them so that you can make sure that for the last lift or your last attempt, you're giving everything to that one. And this is something that my coach would always say to me. Even in a weightlifting scenario, a competition scenario where you have 3 attempts, you only earn the right if you nail the first one. And that's the only job that's in hand. It's one lift at a time. You nail the lift, you'll get the opportunity to take the heavier one. And having this Stone Cold Steve Austin attitude will allow you to do that and ensure that in any competition environment, you get the most out of it. Couple of tips, you probably won't watch this video, but if you do, a couple of things that I would work on would just be balance of the weight in the foot in that pull. If you can work on that to feel better contact through the middle phase of the lift, you'll get slightly better vertical extension, and that could help improve your receiving position a little bit. Other things that I'd probably focus on is pause overhead squats. I think would be great for you. Close grip overhead squats is accessory. More than anything, just help with your torso angle in the bottom position. A little bit of mobility in ankles and in adductors, I think would help. Again, you sit a little bit more upright in the receiving position, take a little bit more pressure off the shoulders and help load the legs. If you did enjoy this technique analysis, then don't forget to go and check out one that I did with one of the strongest weightlifters in the world, Lasher, the other day, which I'll put the links to at the top of this screen so you can click through and go and watch them.